Beautiful design, quick and dirty design, or even no design at all? Cardboard, clamshell, or hard plastic? Welcome to another episode of the Humming Projector podcast, where we will talk about boxes and box art. And with me today to talk about boxes and box art, I have my good friend Douglas Warren. How are you doing today, Doug?
Oh, doing just fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. And very well now that we are going to talk about film. When I decide to watch a film, I usually go to the shelf even before the projector is out. I look through the films with no special plan, really, and I tend to look at the good box art covers first. And I find it fascinating that those good covers attracts me like that. And fascinating it is to such an extent that I think it deserves its own episode. It's fair to say that it's mostly a Super 8 and Standard 8 thing, really. I know I have a couple of covers on 16 as well, and so they do exist, but it's mainly a Super 8 and Standard 8 thing. Have you seen many covers on 16, Doug?
No. When I was involved with the 16 millimeter end of the hobby, every time I got a 16 millimeter film in, it was usually in a can. I don't think I ever got one with an actual cover. I created my own covers for my 16 millimeter prints for a little while. Then I decided, I was going to leave that for the 8 and Super 8 millimeter films.
When it comes to the Super 8 and Standard 8 films, do you present the boxes nicely on a shelf?
Uh, I guess my films tend to be organized in I have a cabinet that I actually keep them in. Um, but the nice thing about the cabinet that I have that I've got the majority of my films in is the way the design. It's a metal cabinet, but it's got holes down the sides of the drawers that allow ventilation. And but I have to say, like when I open up the drawers to pick a film, I do tend to rotate them. Uh, and yes, the best looking box art tends to float to the top. That's what I'm going to generally pull, like Castle films, which I know we're going to touch on our favorites, which those are my favorite box art covers, and those tend to be on the top, and more often than not, that's what I wind up grabbing, and that's how I tend to arrange mine.
I like to see the side of my cover so I can spot them easily, but I'm not organizing them that well, really. I have seen pictures of shells with covers very neatly presented, and it really, really looks good. And I always think, oh, I want to do that one day. But for now, they're kind of mixed, 200 and 400 reels mixed up, and not looking that good. But I like to see the sides so I can easily spot the right one. But
Hmm.
one day I will get that neat shelf, like the ones in the
I,
pictures
under,
on the internet.
I fully understand. It's a thing of just how much space do you have. Another advantage of eight and Super 8 films, you don't have the space issues. That was a big problem when I was into 16. And I love the fact that the smaller gauge, you can get a heck of a lot more on a shelf. You know.
Yeah, and they look good. There is an artistic
Oh yeah.
side of the box art.
Hmm.
Some are really high artistic quality, I would say, and others not so much. And I must say, I'm also fascinated by the bad covers. I don't know how you feel about that, but I kind
Oh.
of like the bad covers also.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. I have a since I predominantly collect digests, 200 and 400 foot. I've got a wide variety of good and bad, and I agree the bad ones for me sometimes are more entertaining to look at than even the better ones. Just because I have kind of a fascination with how that ever got past marketing to actually get put out.
yeah, and we also have drawn covers and also photos.
Hmm.
And the styles of the vendors can also vary a lot. So there are kind of many different artistic expressions there. Um, but one thing I really like when it comes to covers, I like to instantly see which distributor it is, and some are easy to spot. Like some of the newer Universal ones, you can see it even before you can read the text. You know it's a Universal cover, and the same goes for Walton and Ken films. When you see that red square with Super 8 on the top of the cover, you
Hmm.
know it's a Ken films.
Definitely.
I really like that. So that's one thing I wish more distributor thought about. Maybe I'm damaged because I work with Super 8 database, so I really like to know which distributor it is. But so maybe others don't really care, but I do. We have cheap cover art or even no art on expensive prints at all, and I really wondered why not use some extra equator bucks on a print when it really costs a lot of money and end up with a super cheap cover or even no cover at all. There could be glued paper on the front of the box or maybe just a stamped text of what the film is. I understand it was expensive with fancy covers, but something better than plain paper, like generic covers at least. I really am fascinated by that, how they
Hmm.
could sell that expensive films with those bad covers. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't get that either from a marketing standpoint. Film's never been a cheap hobby, so it's like they were cutting corners on some of the packaging back in the day. And I have seen ones like you're describing that are nothing more than like a white cardboard box with a stamp of the title on it, or with like Atlas Films did. They had a very generic cover, which was very crudely drawn, and they would you would have the stamp of what was in it. Of course, Atlas was a you know anything about their history, they were a bit of a fly by night company, anyhow. But I don't get that myself. I mean, and it is one thing I've learned in my own research that bad box art, it's not the world that's worldwide. I've seen terrible box arts from Europe, and I've seen more than my share here in the States. I don't understand that really.
No, I didn't either. So
That's your selling point with a product. Why are you packaging it poorly? I don't get
yeah,
that.
I asked Jed Jones about that, and we'll get back to that a little bit later because I really wondered about that. Jed Jones from Derann. But
Hmm.
before we go there, I want to continue talking about generic covers, but because a lot of the films sold were actually sold with the generic covers. You had general boxes for series like Film Office for Tom and Jerry. You can spot it's a Tom and Jerry, but the name was stamped on every time.
Hmm.
And I must say that I prefer the unique but general over plain covers like the Tom and Jerry general covers for Film Office. They look okay. It's nothing wrong with it, but it's you have many of those, many of the same. So you really need to look at the side to see what it is. But if I could choose between that and a plain cover, of course I would choose the generic cover. But again, I wonder why they didn't do more with them.
Yeah, Castle Films did that for at one point with their science fiction movies, where they had a very generic cover, and they eventually moved on, I believe, and went with more traditional styled artwork. But they went through that with some of their science fiction titles, where it was just a general cover. I know it had like a flying saucer on it, and I mean it wasn't the worst art. It was okay, but then the film would be stamped on the side. I've got a few of those that are like that. And some of those same films that were in that type of box art eventually moved on and got their own box art. But I guess it was a cost saving measure at the time. I don't know. But like you, though, I would rather have that than just a plain white box that's got the film stamped on the side or the top or whatever.
I noticed that some box arts could change over time. You can see on the Super 8 database that the same release would have different covers, and I asked Jed about that,
Hmm.
and he said that early labels were somewhat lacking, almost pathetic, and as the labels turned into full color, it was decided to produce new ones for the better sellers, and that
Hmm.
makes sense. When you see who did better, you perhaps chose to put a little bit more effort into those. And of course, I guess the printing technology made it a bit cheaper over the years. I would suppose so. In the early days, of course it could be expensive to make a good print.
That's a good point because you see the evolution. And I always go back to Castle because here in the U.S., of course, Castle Films was like the golden standard for package movies for years, and Castle, especially during a particular period like in the '60s, to me they had some of the very best artwork on their films, and And then when they became Universal 8, it kind of took a major decline, if you know what I'm talking about. They went
Yeah.
from original artwork to what I call their Andy Warhol period with some of their film boxes, and I think those were absolutely terrible. I've never talked to anybody that really likes those that much, and that's also when they went to the hard plastic cases, which in theory might have been a good idea, but long term it wasn't healthy for the films.
I fully agree, except for one thing. The one thing I like is that I instantly see that those Andy Warhol kind of plastic covers were from Universal. I don't have to look it up even.
And that's true because they were the only one that were producing those types. Like I said initially, I think the concept was initially was like, okay, this isn't so bad, but as we all know now, long term, it was unhealthy for the films. But I'll tell you one thing though, I will take those over the clamshell cases because those have done more damage over the years, in my opinion. One little trick I learned with the Universal 8 cases is to make those viable is you drill holes in them and allow airflow. And I've done that on a few, and it works. And but
Yeah.
the clamshell, not a fan of those. I don't. Anytime I've gotten a film in that's in a clamshell, even if the case is in good shape, I still remove it and put it into cardboard because I don't. Those have done too much damage long term to films.
Yeah, and the clamshells also seem to be more brittle over the years. So
Always. I don't think I've ever gotten a clamshell in that wasn't falling apart at some point
no,
or starting to crack.
and even those that I had that were okay, I had a breakdown on one of my shelves this summer
Oh,
where it actually fell off the wall. It was my
oh
mistake, of
yes,
course, but that was
yes, I remember
terrible.
that.
I came
Wow.
to the cabin and I found a big pile of films.
Oh
And
no.
what I was going to say is that it became pretty evident which boxes survived that better. If you take like 100 films and see which ones survived. The clamshells, of course, were damaged in the corners pretty quickly. I think the defects looks even worse than the defects on the cardboard boxes. Defects
Yes,
on the clamshells ones looks terrible straight away. And the
I
hard
agree
plastic
with that.
covers, they either
Mhm.
survive or absolutely disintegrate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
That's true.
I have, for example, I have World in Flames, the series in hard plastic covers, and I think at least one third of those have broken when mailed to me.
Oh,
Even though it's up and down how well they have been packed, but even the ones packed quite okay tend to not survive shipping. So I'm not a fan of the hard plastic covers.
yeah.
I think
That's
at least one third
understandable.
is broken.
Yeah, I just kind of developed a policy years ago with my collection that, more often than not, if it comes in if the artwork is good and the box is in really nice shape, well, that's a keeper as far as the box is concerned. But if it's clamshell, as I said, it immediately goes into a cardboard box, and I'll adapt my own thing for the artwork on it, which I've done for years anyhow. When even original cardboard boxes come in bad shape, which is not uncommon, as you know. I mean, I know I must sound like I'm a real hater on the clamshell, but the only Super 8 films I've ever gotten in that suffered from, and yes, they do, vinegar syndrome have been films that have arrived in clamshell cases. I've had to throw out a couple of prints because of that.
Yeah. And one other thing with the clamshells, they often tend to be bumpy over the years. The
Yes.
front can become uneven at the
Hmm.
surface, and when that happens, you not much you can do.
Yeah, they don't take temperature change very well, and you sort of get the wavy texture on it. And more often than not, about the only thing that I wind up salvaging from those is I'll cut them open if they're already in bad shape, and I'll pull the artwork out.
But those that have been taken care of and been stored well, they look good on the shelf. I must admit
Hmm.
that. I've seen pictures from German collectors with a lot of clamshells, and they look beautiful when they are
Hmm.
okay and stacked up on a shelf.
I won't disagree with that, but I guess in my experience, like I said, I haven't had much luck with the ones that I've received. And I'm pretty certain thinking about it now, I don't have a single clamshell on the shelf. Like I said, they usually go into cardboard boxes that I buy and do my own artwork on them.
And talking about German clamshells, one thing I've seen from some of the German releases that they sometimes have bigger covers for smaller reels. When you see the cover, you think it's a 400, and you open it and it's a 200, and sometimes even a 300.
Yes, I've noticed that.
That's a strange one. I see the point, because on the shelf they will all look the same when they are at a big size, but I sometimes get a little bit disappointed when I open it and think, of course, it was a 200.
Yeah, of course, Ken Films was notorious for doing that with their 50-foot rolls because
Yeah,
the cartons they put those 50-footers in basically were that a size that would fit a 100-foot reel.
right.
And from what I understand, that was just an old marketing ploy. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I'm going to get a bigger reel, but you were just getting a 50-footer. And like I
yeah,
said, it would have fit a 100-footer easy, which is not
yeah.
a common size for Super 8 or 8 millimeter reels. Anyhow, I actually have one or two, believe it or not.
And to be fair, the cover says how much film is inside. Like Piccolo films from Germany always states that how many meters it is. So they don't cheat you, but it looks better with the big box.
Still,
So what do you do when the boxes are not perfect? Have you ever bought a second copy of to get a better box?
Oh yeah, I've done that a few times. Not real often, but I have done it some, especially if it's a title that I'm really, really a fan of. I have done that before. Heck, I've even bought some 3 times to finally get a better quality box. And let's be honest, with collectors nowadays, the boxes I think are as important as the film that's inside. That's pretty evident if you frequent the forums and the groups. That's a big part of the collecting now.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
So if you have old tidy boxes, to be fair, some releases, unless you want to pay through the nose, you will end up with some tidy boxes. Do you replace them with black ones or with blank ones, or perhaps with a printed front? What do you do with those that don't look good?
What I usually tend to do is just get plain white boxes, and I create my own artwork and paste onto the boxes. It looks
Yeah.
better than having a box sitting on the shelf that's falling apart.
Yeah, I know a lot of people do that, and it makes sense. But I feel really, really bad inside if I throw away a box, because I feel I throw a bit of history away. So I tend
I get
to
that.
keep more than
I
I
get that.
probably should of the boxes.
I used to save a lot of boxes, but then again, I also have sold a number of box collections because people wanted the original boxes.
Yeah,
I've sold off probably 3 lots of original boxes because what I tend to do, I have a friend in the adjoining state that does the same. He will make compilations, especially when you're dealing with the old black and white, like silent digest, and he'll get like a 400-foot reel and he'll fill it up full of little 50-footers all spliced together or a couple of 200-footers. And I do a bit of the same. And so sometimes I'll have the original boxes left, and those will get sold to other collectors.
right. I choose to always keep mine in the original length.
Hmm.
Again, for me, it's like keeping the original history. But of course, for 50 feet, you have to change a lot, so I see the point. I
Hmm.
want to do one plug though for the Super 8 database. Yeah, as you might know,
Absolutely.
as the listener might know, I also run the Super 8 database, and on the Super 8 database you can download the cover. So if you have missing a cover, or if you have a very very bad box, and can replace it with a blank white one, you can go to Super 8 database for many of the covers and download a PDF with the correct size to that cover, and print that out, and that might be better than the ones you already have. So that's a tip for today. Another cool project when it comes to Walton boxes is the site super8filmboxes.wordpress.com. I will link to that in the show notes. That's a project that John Armour from the UK had, where he, with the permission from the descendants of those that ran the Walton company, he printed Walton boxes, generic boxes, but with the Walton design that you could use for those tiny boxes you had from Walton. They look really, really gorgeous. He has not many left, but some are left, and you can head over to that link that I will link to in the show notes. And I must say, I really love that project, and I hope that others will do the same with other distributors as well. To be fair, a lot of boxes not look that good anymore.
I would love to see somebody do that. Like here in the States, I'd love to see somebody, reproduce like Castle film boxes, and heck, even some of the Kin film boxes wouldn't be. It would be nice to see them replicated, and I hope that's kind of a trend for the hobby. I think it's great what John's doing for Walton. It really is.
Let's head back a little bit to the covers again, because we talk a lot about the box art, but who really were the designers? And I tried to figure that out, and we don't know much. I can't find a lot of information about the designers. There's actually just one single name that I've seen from doing the design of the box releases, and that was Marianne Frost that did some of the designs for Derann. And the only reason I know that is because Jed at his Derann Vaults Facebook group. I've linked to that also in the show notes. If you are not a member of that group, I highly recommend that you join it. But in his group, he sometimes mentions some of his releases, and some of the designs were made from Marianne Frost, and that's the only name I know of any of the designers. And her designs were, I think it did really well. She was married to one of the customers, and they had regular meetings to discuss the labels at great length sometimes. But it wasn't very often they rejected a label design. I thought it was cool that actually there were one name that we can actually know something about.
Yeah, because I figure with a lot of these companies, it was probably either a freelancer that was hired, or maybe like in the case of Universal, probably somebody in house in their art department. But like you said, these were generally nameless people. There was usually no signatures on the boxes, so you had no clue who did the artwork.
I had one theory, and that was that covers were more important back in the day when the films were presented in shops, but more generic covers were probably used in later years. That was my theory. I suppose maybe Ken films and perhaps Walt Disney films were sold in shops. Piccolo films were sold in shops, I know. But in later years, we know that many of the films were shopped over mail order and things like that. And I asked Jed how important he thought it was with the cover designs, how well it was presented, how much importance that had. And he said that I personally don't think that the labels were a significant part of the customer making a purchase. The 8mm community were pretty knowledgeable about the films available and knew what they wanted before they came into the shop. They did look good at conventions, and it's just possible that we did pick up the odd impulse sale. But still, why didn't they do it a little bit better? And Jed basically said it's a matter of cost, and labels were a waste, really. So even though we could wish now, as collectors in the 2000s, that they spent more time in it, I guess it business-wise were not worth the money to spend more on the covers. But a little bit sad though when you think about how much were spent on the films. I would
Well,
say.
I think here in the States, back when 8 millimeter Super 8 were more of a consumer product, like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the packaging was more, I guess, more important, more prominent. Because I mean, the first time I ever remember seeing packaged movies was I was a little boy. This is the 1960s, and we had a camera shop in the town in Texas I grew up. And I remember going in there with my dad because my dad shot standard 8 film when we were kids. And I remember being fascinated by this rack of Ken films, Castle films, and seeing all the horror titles, which as a little boy, I was fascinated with. And that's, there you go again. It was the box art that attracted me. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's Frankenstein, a Dracula film, there's Rodin, and I was just totally taken. I think that's what, even at that young age, what just drew my interest in was seeing those box arts. And department stores in the U.S. also generally had film departments, camera departments that also had usually a couple of racks of movies like that. I remember many a time just sitting there and I'd stand there looking at those things sometimes until they ran me off because I guess they thought as a little boy I was going to try to, grab something and run, try to steal. But I was just absolutely fascinated by all the titles. And there you go again. That box art is what drew me in.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you present it like that. But as Jed said, for Derann, people didn't tend to like accidentally bump into the shop in for Derann, I guess. So it made sense for them to not put that much effort into the covers. But there's one exception for the Derann covers, if you have noticed. Some of the covers were quite good, I would say, but some are standing out like exceptionally well, and that is the Disney releases they made. I would say that one of the best covers produced, really, for the Super 8 world. And do you have any idea of why those were so much better than the others?
Uh, I guess again, it depends upon what films you're talking about. I would think, I don't know.
I know the answer, really, because I asked Jed, because I was curious.
I'll let you spill then so I don't make too big a fool of myself here, but you go ahead.
I would be interesting to hear your theory, because I was way off. I had no idea. The answer was really Disney demanded it. That's a plain answer.
Having dealt with Disney on a different plane, on a business sense, like I did at one time in a former job of mine, I absolutely am not surprised by that. That's sort of the way they operate.
It was strange for me when I started thinking about it, because you can see one of the later covers from Derann for other titles were okay, but not much. And then the Disney covers are beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that would make sense. That would make sense. That's Disney, pushing and protecting their brand. That's just the way they tend to be as a company, and that's their intellectual property. It makes sense. They're an iconic brand. And Disney is another company when it came to packaged films. Always liked the way they did the box art in their films.
Yeah.
I personally now we're treading off into something. I'm getting a little off track here, but one thing Disney used to do, and I know some collectors have bashed them for this, but they would tend to do more excerpts than they would digest. And I always personally liked the excerpts because they did such a great job with them. I mean,
Mm.
the excerpt they did from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which also has box art I really like, is one of my favorites. And I have a copy of that. And that's one, speaking of that I did several searches until I got a really good box with.
Mm.
I got lucky. Not only did I get a good box, I got a beautiful print with it too. And that's one of my favorites. It's in probably my top 5 films in my collection that I enjoy watching. It's such an exciting sequence with the squid.
Yeah. And sometimes I would even say that the box could be more interesting than the digest inside, depending on the digest, of
There's a
course.
lot of truth to that too.
Yeah. Um,
Definitely.
I have some especially old sci-fi movies where I absolutely love the covers. It could be cool to watch the sci-fi digest as well, but the covers are really, really cool. For example, War of the Planets and Earth versus the Flying Saucers and Radar Men on the Moon, 3 examples of covers I really love. And even though the digest can be cool as well, I really love those covers. So I must admit that sometimes I buy buy the just as much for the cover as the film inside.
Oh, absolutely. And matter of fact, of the 3 films you mentioned, I would say The Earth versus the Flying Saucers is probably the best edited of the 3. The other 2 are a little, they're okay, but they're not the best in my opinion. And I have all 3, so I think I can speak on that.
And maybe there's a difference between collectors versus film lovers, perhaps, where the collectors
Hmm.
focus more on the items, so the boxes means more than the film lovers that perhaps cares more just about the film. I don't know, but
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I've even had a couple of collectors tell me that the box art is generally it's, for this point in time in the hobby is the collectability of the box art is more important than the contents of the film.
so we have touched this topic. But which distributor do you think had the best covers?
Well, again, I have to say this up front. I have to speak more from a viewpoint of somebody in the U.S. and the States because though I have films from like Derann, Walton, others, Film Office in my collection. I have to speak more with what I have the most experience with, and that's U.S. distributors. And I think I've kind of dropped that earlier, but
Yeah,
my favorite was in their heyday was
yeah, they were
Castle
good, really
Films.
good.
I mean, I just loved their box art back in the day. Their horror, not just their horror science fiction titles, but other ones as well. That is until the Universal 8 Andy Warhol period came around, and then
Because
It kind
in
of
my
took a
notes
good.
I wrote exactly that. Not Andy Warhol because that was an exceptionally well expression, but I don't like the two color pictures with green and white or pink and white or blue
Yeah,
or white. It doesn't work for me.
yeah, it lacks imagination for one thing. And I'm a former art student, so I look at that and go, "That's just lazy," in my opinion, when I see that. And now, one thing I do want to touch on. I don't know how some collectors feel about it. I don't have a problem with it. But I know here in the U.S., as the height of the Super 8 phenomena was started to die off in the early 80s. I know it kept going strong in Europe with Derann leading the charge, thankfully. But when it started to die off here in the U.S., honestly, the last probably glory year for that here was probably 79, 80 is my what I'm going to say. It was limping along in maybe 81, but by 82 it was dying on the vine. But when companies, the Ken releases of MGM films, ABC movies did this as well. They moved away from original box art and they started using the film posters on the boxes. Now, I didn't have a problem with that because, I mean, let's be real, that was original promotional materials for the original films themselves when they were in the theater. And I don't have a problem with that at all. Actually, to be truthful, I preferred that, compared to some of the let's just be honest, like Ken films, some of their original artwork, which tended to be sometimes interpretations of the movie posters done very poorly at times.
Yeah, but don't mind actually a bit lower quality art as long as it is something special that stands out.
Hmm.
Of course, it's to a certain extent. If it's really bad, it's bad. But I like that you can get an impression of the film straight away, get into the story straight away, in a sense. So at least if they try, I prefer that way over any generic cover, because some of the generic covers are boring. I mean, for example, the Columbia generic cover from Columbia, you have
Oh yes, yes.
the red and yellow one with a there's a lady with a torch there. Maybe that's Libertas, the Roman goddess of liberty, or perhaps I don't know who she is, that one with the torch there. But there's just too much going on, and the title of the film is just some tiny
It's
text.
stamped on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stamped on. Yeah. So if they even try a little bit on the artwork, I would prefer that way over the generic ones.
Yeah, Columbia did try to start produce. They did produce some original artwork. I know some of their science fiction titles, and which one of the more hilarious ones, in my opinion, even though I felt that it was one of Columbia's best digests because it had zero narration, guys, just letting you know, was the movie Failsafe, which is a nuclear thriller, but a very good film if you're into that genre. But the box art was absolutely hilarious because the fun part was trying to pick out, because they didn't do a very good job of trying to I guess you could say draw the actors. You're trying to figure out which one is Henry Fonda, which one is Walter Matthau. I mean, it was so poorly done. It was truly hilarious. Now that's funny though, because they did actual box art on the 400-foot release. On the 200-foot, they actually had a couple of photos from the original film, which was interesting because I used to own the 200-foot print, which I no longer have these films, and I'm trying to eventually hunt them back down if I can get good copies. But Columbia, and also Columbia did a little bit of the Andy Warhol stuff like Universal 8 did, like 20 Million Miles to Earth. They had that kind of really sloppy bad artwork on it, which was pretty funny. But I don't know, I mean, like getting to bad artwork, which is again an interest is a fun topic to me. The worst of Ken films wasn't as bad as some I've seen out there, which I don't know. I just have a fascination with that again from an art student standpoint. It's like, how did they ever get this? Well, whoever agreed to let this go out, But again, like I said, it was probably some relative of the guy that ran the company.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the African movie posters. I don't know if you have seen that on the internet, but there have been a few around where some cinemas out there in Africa, they had just a local guy probably working at the cinema trying to make a movie poster, and that was what was hanging on the wall there. I get a little bit the same
It's the
impression as they say. It's probably a relative of some of the ones working there.
Yeah, the gentleman that ran Ken Films, Bob Lane, which I really wish that I'm assuming Mr. Lane is probably passed now because I mean you're going back quite a few years when Ken Films was around, but I wish people like him. I wish because we have a name associated with the head of the company. I wish eventually somebody could find more information out and put out more of a biography on this guy because I would love to read that. I love the history of film companies, and again, that kind of rolls back into the whole box art thing again because there was an article about Ken Films, and Bob Lane was mentioned, and the person who wrote the article he also had said that it looked like all their artwork was done by his 10-year-old nephew because they were taking a bit of a poke at it. I, you know, I personally with Ken Films again because that was a very popular consumer brand of home movies here in the U.S. Along with they and Castle were the two biggest. I think there's a certain charm about their artwork. It may not be
Yeah,
the best. Some were really really bad, but I do find it like I said, it's kind of charming in a way,
I think so
And
too. I
some of their
like the Ken
box,
film boxes.
yeah, I mean, like I love the. I don't know why it's simple, but like the artwork on Flight of the Phoenix, there's something about it I just really like.
Yeah, and you're perhaps I'm not an art person, and perhaps you're right with it being more charming than really good. But I would go with charming.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Talking about lower quality covers, some people make different covers, try to make their own covers, perhaps to brush up some of the lower quality ones. What do you think about non-original art or fan art? Do you like that, or isn't that not for you?
I don't have a problem with that at all. I guess because I haven't done it from scratch, but the fact that I've had to recreate, from whatever my tastes were at the given time. When I've taken films out of battered boxes, put them into white boxes, plain film boxes, and have decided to do new artwork on them, I don't really have a problem with that. I tend to generally look for movie posters that I print and put on the boxes. But if somebody wanted to create something original from the ground up, I don't have a problem with that. If it's done decently, why not? You know.
Yeah, if they like it, of course I have no problem with it. But for me, it's about the history again. So I'm not into
Hmm.
fan art, and again for Super 8 database, I have got the suggestions many times to add fan art because they are better than the ones that were originally there.
Hmm.
And but I have decided to not include them because for Super 8 database at least it's more about preserving the history. And for in my own collection, I could have done differently, but again, I would stick with the original one, even though there are bad ones.
Totally understand and respect that. Yeah.
But I see that many of the fan art made out there is really really good. So hats off for them for making something nice.
No, I understand. And I totally respect that as well. I understand that.
And for me, restoration is something else than new design. So printing a cover from Super 8 database when it's so bad that you can't see what it is, I don't have a big problem with that because for me that's restoration. But new design is something
Well, I wanted
different.
to mention something, if I may. The fact that you have that option on Super 8 database where people can print that out, so they can, get fresh art, the fresh covers that they can put on their boxes. I think that is incredibly great because it does allow people to do their own form of restoration for their films. And I just want to say, I think that's a wonderful option you have on there. I mean, it's just, I look at it as another way to keep this hobby preserved. And I guess I'm getting on a little bit of soapbox
Mm.
there, but anything that'll keep it alive and keep it viable is fine with me.
There's just two more points on my list of topics here, and the first one of those are have the headings frustrations. There are two types of frustrations I have when it comes to
Okay.
boxes. The number one is the wrong film in the box.
Oh,
I mean,
yes. I know about that. I've been there.
you see that nice box and you really look forward to see that film, and then
Yes.
you know.
I've had that happen.
But the second one, yeah, the second frustration I have with boxes, which is actually more about the boxes, are stickers from sellers where the box have a sticker on saying the number of the film or the price of the film or the quality, like B plus or something. If the seller has chosen nice stickers, they come off well, but quite often they rip off parts of the cover, which really frustrates me. So I wish they didn't do that. If they have to do that, at least do it on the back side and not on the front. So that was a
No,
little frustration for
I
me here
completely
at the end.
agree with you that on that topic 100% because I have dealt with that before where I've gotten films that have had little stickers on and they didn't pick the best spot to put them on and you're like I want to remove it, but how much of the box art is it going to tear? And more often than not, because you're already dealing with
Yeah,
like if it's a cardboard box, you're already dealing with old paper anyhow.
yeah.
It takes it off, and I really don't like that.
But then we are getting towards the end of this topic here, and I have just one more question for you. What is the best and worst cover of all the films you have owned? Do you have any experience or you want to share with your covers?
Um, I think as far as best, and again, I think that's a matter of taste because it's going to also boil down to a favorite film in your collection. For me, it was the war titled Too Late the Hero from ABC Films. They did an adaptation of the movie poster, but it was so well done. I mean, just looking at the picture was action packed and it gives you an idea of what you're dealing with the movie. I think for my personal taste, that was one of my favorites. One thing I do want to touch on for a second, if I may. I know we could probably
Yeah,
sit here for
sure.
another hour talking about this. So much to talk about with it. But I mentioned how Castle, when Castle Films became Universal Light Films, where some of their films, they went through doing the Andy Warhol thing with some of their titles, but they also started, if you remember, they went the movie poster route with most of their 400 foot and up editions. They did that something most people don't generally mention. But you think of movies like The Sting, you think of like Battlestar Galactica. They all went those later releases for a couple of years before their demise. They went the movie poster out with their packaging, which I was fine with that again because I don't have a problem with that. Again, I'd rather see that than some really poorly done artwork. Worst. Um, Okay, I'll probably get pinged by some of the listeners about this because I can't remember the title right off the top of my head, but it's a film that I mentioned to you earlier. It was a Dracula title that had absolutely the worst artwork I'd ever seen. I remember drawing like that when I was about 6 years old. And the amazing thing about the title was that they actually repackaged it two or three times with the same box art, but with slightly different colors until finally they improved it. Um, I'm thinking that was one of the films that was released by Allied Artists before their titles were acquired. Like Allied Artists Republic before Ken acquired them. But it was really horrible. And now I'm gonna probably wind up looking this up when we get done with this because I'm old. I'm forgetting the title. Okay, over to you. What's your best and worst?
For me, again, when we talk about best, it's more like getting the right feeling on the film more than the top art for me. So the best cover I have is probably War of the Planets. It's a Castle film release. It's pink and yellow colors in an explosion of flying saucers flying around. It's a lot of action going on, looking like an old-fashioned sci-fi look. So I like that because I instantly get that 50s sci-fi feeling when I see the cover with a lot of action going on. And I can imagine if I was a kid in the 50s or 60s, I would have loved that cover. When it comes to worst cover, it's a little bit strange because it's a film that digest I really love, but it's the Anderson tapes, a film with Sean Connery, and it's one of the most weird covers, I guess. It's a bad Sean Connery stepping on a Super 8 reel with one foot. It's related to the movie poster where he had where his right leg was resting on something, and for the Super 8 release, it was resting on a Super 8 reel.
I remember that
It's a
one.
shame really because the digest is really cool. I got it from a friend a long time ago, and the digest is actually one of my favorite digests in my collection. It's about a robbery, and you can follow the. It's a story that really suits the digest format, but the cover is not up there.
Yeah, I remember that one. I remember that one. That was an odd choice, I thought, on Columbia's part,
Yeah.
because, like I said again, Columbia had some unique ones, like the failsafe one I mentioned with the really terrible box art on it.
Yeah, you can look it up on the Super 8 database if you want to see how that was. And the picture on the Super 8 database is actually my cover. And with that, I think we have actually covered most of the good points of this topic, I guess. I just wanted to mention a project here on the podcast that deserves more attention, and that is the Off2 project. You can find that at the off2.de, OFF number 2.de. I'll make a link in the show notes. And that is a project by Joachim Schmidt from Germany. He makes a lot of good videos, some interviews, and some of the videos have presentations of releases where he talks about the releases and shows some cuts from the releases. It's really well made. It's mostly in German, but all his newer videos have subtitles in English, so I really recommend that you go over there and take a look. And he's interested in many of the same things as me in the way of preserving history and the research of a small gauge film, just like me. And we were both approached from researchers in Germany, actually, me for the Super 8 database and him from the Off2 project, where they were interested in what we had done. And I would love to see more from Joachim, and perhaps you will see him here later on this podcast. Another thing that we want to mention here is an event called Film is Fabulous, where members of the British Film Collectors Convention and the Blackpool Film Collectors Conventions are working closely with the De Montfort University's Cinema and Television History Institute to preserve valuable film collections held privately in the United Kingdom. It will be held this Sunday, the 29th of October at the Phoenix Cinema and Art Centre in Leicester, and there will be screenings on 35mm and Super 8. There will be special guests with expert knowledge of film collections and preservation, and discussions on archiving of film and missing television episodes. And there will also be film dealers there. And preservation of history is close to my heart, and I was really excited to see this going on in the UK, whereas the German researchers that I have mentioned before, and there's an article in the Super 8 database, have been focused more on the impact of the Super 8 releases and their place in history. The British initiative are looking more into preserving the copies in private collections and especially finding copies of TV episodes and films that might be missing in other archives. And any research looking at the small gauge formats is something I love to see, and I wish I had been living in the UK, because if I had, I would surely be going there. And I will put a link in the show note to this event in case you live in the UK and have a chance to go there. And finally, I want to mention the Blackpool Convention that will be held the 24th to the 26th of November 2023 at the Grand Hotel in Blackpool. As usual, there will be the Friday film show with a feature and the Saturday film show where they show all sorts of digest and documentaries and everything, and the Saturday dinner. And the dinner is the only thing you need to actually book for in advance. All other things you can just show up. And on Sunday there's the film fair where many dealers, including Classic Hope Cinema, usually are there. And one thing I look forward to more than anything else at the Blackpool Convention is meeting all the great collectors out there. And Joachim Schmidt, that I just mentioned from the Off2 project, actually plans to go there this year. So if you want to meet Joachim, you can go there. Jed Jones usually is there. I'm not sure if I asked him if he'll go this year, but he is usually there. And I always love to talk to Jed. He is such a nice person. And Shori, that you listened to in the previous episode about Tennessee, he will be there. And from my part of the world, at least 5 from Norway and 1 from Sweden will be there. I don't know if that is a plus. I mean, we come in peace. It's not like 1,000 years ago in the Viking Age where we plunder your monasteries, I promise. And I will link to the Blackpool Convention. They have a brand new webpage that has been around for a couple of months. I'll link to that in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode and want to follow us, you can listen to us and subscribe to our podcast using players like Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube. You can also use any podcast player supporting RSS. Go to our website, hummingprojector.com, to learn how to subscribe. You can also listen to any current and previous episodes on our website without any additional software. If you have any feedback for this episode or a suggestion for a future episode, please send an email to feedback@hummingprojector.com. Finally, I want to mention a feedback that we got on YouTube from Silvo. He says, "Absolutely love these podcasts. Wonderfully entertaining and evocative of the great memories of years ago. I started collecting in 1973. Great job. How about doing an episode on all those wonderful film catalogs and adverts we used to drool over, often not being able to afford them, but just reading the catalogs were pure magic, Silvo." And Silvo, that was a great idea, and I have added that topic on my list of future topics, and I'm sure we'll visit that one day. And if you have a suggestion for another topic or another type of feedback, we would love to get feedback from you. And with that, we have reached the end of this podcast. And thanks to Douglas Warren again for being here chatting with me about covers. Great to talking to you again, Douglas.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I'm always happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will see Doug here soon again discussing a different topic with me. And my name is Eivind, and thanks for listening.